Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. A warm welcome to the design track in Tech Innovation 2020. I'm Mark, the Executive Director of Design Singapore Council, and thank you IPI for inviting us back again to the Tech Innovation Conference. This year's theme is about catalyzing innovation with design. But can design actually be a catalyst for innovation? And what exactly does design mean? Well, a study by the Design Management Institute in 2016 shown that design-led companies deliver on average more than 200% returns over the S&P 500 than non-design-led companies. So what exactly are these design-led companies doing differently? And again, what does design mean? Well, as Steve Jobs put it aptly, design is more than just making things look pretty. It's actually about making things work. And in fact, it is a key to problem solving and innovating. And this process is now known as design thinking. Design-led companies use design to create value and unlock innovation and opportunities. And for successful innovation and transformation to take place, you need these three elements to be in place. First, technological feasibility. Second, business viability. And third, market desirability. A good design-led process enables an organization to bring these three elements together in order for innovation to take place. And this process also needs to be underpinned by great empathy for your user needs and the experience with your product, service, or experience. Well, actually now here's a great example of how a company leveraged design to propel innovation in Nike. Nike has actually completely reinvented its shoe manufacturing process. And rather than setting out to design a new shoe, the company designed a new way to conceptualize the manufacturing of an athletic shoe itself. Nike's designers pioneered the new Nike Flyknit technology to deliver a peak performance shoe for athletes in a sustainable way. It actually took them 195 tries using the reinvented manufacturing process before the Flyknit racer was actually born. And it was a shoe that was more environmentally friendly and reduced wastage by some 80% as compared to other traditional Nike footwear. Such is the power of using design and design thinking, where you start with how you can make your products or services better for your customers, and then balancing that out with technological and business viability. And this is also what we at Design Singapore strive to do, and that is helping businesses adopt design and design thinking as a key enabler for them to drive profitable and desirable human-centered innovation. Design Singapore is actually the national agency for design in Singapore. Our vision is to help Singapore become an innovation-driven economy and a lovable city by design by 2025. And we are constantly working closely with the industry, design consultants, and both public and private sector to help drive business transformation through the use of design. Recognizing the importance of design and technological innovation, our partner IPI invited us to helm an inaugural design track at last year's Tech Innovation Conference. And this session was very well received by the tech community, and we invited prominent design professionals and practitioners to share. And this year we are bringing you two plenaries, one on sustainability and the other on smart and livable cities. Each plenary is anchored by three prominent speakers, pioneers in their own fields in the space of design and innovation, and we are honored to have them grace today's session. We've also added two new segments in this year's design track, the Design Runway and the Design Think Tank. And much like IPI's crowd pitching and crowdsourcing, but for designers and for solutions primed at using design. So we hope you'll have a fruitful session of great takeaways on the value of design and its role in catalyzing innovation. And once again, I'd like to thank all the speakers who have graciously offered their time and effort in making this design track come to life, and I'm sure it will be an inspiring and illuminating one. And with that, thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. It is truly a pleasure to be back in Singapore, and it's my deepest wish that I was there with you and not sitting here where I am at the moment at my mother's house in Ohio. Today's theme, 2021, Our New World Order, what's going to come. We all know this little virus. Very often I'm often asked if I'm sitting in a little bench looking up into the sky as I think about the future, and the answer is no. I wish I could, but not all the time. Usually I'm also, like all of us, trying to calm thoughts and pull together what's happening and make sense of what's happening tomorrow and today. But one thing we do know is that our economies, our lives in so many places around the world went from full speed to zero. There was a great emptiness, just like here at the ETH in Zurich, where I now work, or in the trams all over the world, or in the skies, no longer flying, or this is sometimes a good thing, actually, very short control lines. I mean, bad for business, but good for the traveler. But there's also great togetherness, which we've been feeling. And to me, it's really fascinating to look at these different types of togethernesses, these way in which we have, like we are right now, come together in this Zoom, this digital world where many thought it would be impossible to transform our businesses. And all of a sudden now we're interacting in this way as a matter of the new normal. And the question for all of us is really, what will normal look like in our really crazy VUCA world? What curves are we going to see, and when are we going to see them? Which ones will return? Which ones are going to keep the way they are forever? Which one will be bent? Which ones will continue to fall? But really, what will normal look like? This is on all of our minds, every single one of us, from the Prime Minister down to the youngest, newest newborn baby. Okay, maybe the newborn babies aren't thinking about what normal will be like. They're just trying to figure out what the world's going to be like. But in any case, we're all trying to think about that. And as our good friend Peter Ho always says, it is complicated and it's complex. What's interesting for me is to think about these two issues and the question of how it has impacted us really has depended upon whether you sit or stand to work. Huge difference how this has impacted us. Huge impact if you're sitting, but we can go home. But if you're standing, what happens there? Interesting to think of the difference. COVID-19 has been an accelerator of the inevitable. Failing business models have only failed faster. The digital transformation, which is no longer the someday or being discussed in all of the halls and conference rooms, is a someday, is now a must. And how could we not have transformed? It has also increased the appreciation of moments which really matter. Sort of a rediscovery of this interaction. And I truly believe this has been, for me, a fascinating insight. The efficiency of the transactional. How many people still want to go across the city to a meeting which takes 15 minutes, which you could have easily done on Zoom? The desire for the interpersonal, like I would love to be able to be there with you, to be able to afterwards go and have a dinner together. The importance of this and the necessity of the meandering and the creative. I have yet to find a digital media which is actually as good as sitting together around a table with a whiteboard. And so we've actually figured out the differences between these. We've also have an incredibly increased awareness of global supply chains. There was a dearth of items which were unexpected and a rediscovery of the possibility of local in different parts of the world. The question of how can we become more local? It's also been a crash course in the fragility of globalization. It was shockingly easy to close up borders. Here in Europe, I was shocked at how quickly the borders between the European nations just went up. The armies were mobilized and boom. And actually, it's been a crash course in this understanding of the new global order. The question for all of us, of course, is where will these new alliances lead? What will this new global order look like? So What will normal look like? Well, we've been seeing it. And for us, now the question is of stickiness. What will stick? Because we are going to have a vaccine. This virus will become part of every one of our DNAs, of yours and of mine. So what will stick? Well, one thing we do know that when flying into Washington just a few weeks ago, on November 6th or 7th, there was a big question of stickiness with the outgoing president and how sticky he would be. But we do know, I'm just going to leave that to the side. We do know that the new normal is going to look a lot like it did a year ago, right? Marina Bay is going to still be a magnet. It's going to still be stunning. The gardens by the bay are going to be blooming. It's going to be gorgeous. It's going to be hotter than heck in summer, right? So the normal is still going to look a lot like it did a year ago. Chicago is still going to be an endless city of lights. San Francisco is still going to have the Golden Gate Bridge. Central Park, all of these urban areas are still going to remain vibrant as they have for hundreds or thousands of years. It's not going to go away. Right? This is for me quite interesting and quite important. We'll still be wondering where our food is going to come from, whether it's the fish farms or whether it's food farms. But what is going to be different, there is going to be a digital twist. And this is what we have seen. And we know that digital twist is real. And the question for all of us is, of course, what do we do with this new digital twist? Because change is constant. None of us can stop it. And here we see the urban heat island effect across the nation from this, and this is so fascinating for me to see what can we do to cool Singapore. This comes from the Singapore ETH Center in Singapore, this research on the future, designing the future. Everything inconvenient will change. So all we have to do is think about points of inconvenience in our daily lives. And this is where design has its forte, to understand how to change those things, right? To look at those points of inconvenience and to deeply understand them as we change as humans. Think about our port. We're already thinking about the next and the next port. At one time, it was beautifully important and convenient to have those ships come into the city. And now we don't want them anywhere close to us. We want them way out there. So the definition of convenience changes with time as well. But the interesting thing now, complexity is now free. Now that I find fascinating. When we print steel, when we print concrete, when we do 3D printing, it doesn't matter to the machine whether it's a straight line or a curved line. So the question then becomes for us, what are we going to do with this new fact that complexity is free? What are we going to do? This is a design challenge that is phenomenal. Not only this physical complexity, but also the digital complexity. And you can argue whether or not you like the forms, that's perfectly valid. But now we can free ourselves into new ways of thinking that we could not even begin to do 10 years ago. Incredibly wonderful time, especially when we're looking at the challenges of climate change, of sea level rise, of biodiversity loss, of the great extinction which we're feeling. So what can we be doing to change that? We're also in an era of augmentation. And this is for me totally fascination, pardon me. And this is totally fascinating in the building world, where we can now, with digital tools, recreate many craft that we lost, that we totally lost. Or we can use augmented reality to understand how to bend metal into forms, which our designers can create, and then the craftsmen and women can bend into place using their goggles or put blocks together just for fun. Or we know that construction is a very dangerous profession. right? It destroys a man or a woman's body. So now with exoskeletons, with augmenting our physical capability, we can change that. Or we can augment our capabilities in construction and in design so we can get the best of the human and the machine. So we're actually focusing on what people do best and what machines do best to create a whole new hybrid design vocabulary here. Some stone hewn by hand, but with holes drilled with millimeter, sub-millimeter precision by drills through the stone. This is the Sagrada Familia Cathedral in Barcelona. Another thing that we do know, in looking into the future, anything that can be automated will be automated. Now, for many, this is terrifying because they know that their job is easily automated. For others, it's liberating because they'll think about, if that part's automated, we can do this. So all of us from the design community need to be thinking about everything that can be automated will be. So what does that mean next? What can we be doing with this new capability? Now, a few other things that go along with this. One is a democratization of tools. It used to be the domain of specialists to have specialist knowledge and tools. But now with the internet and with the digital transformation, we have this deep democratization of tool sets. So the question is, what do we do as a designer, as an engineer, as an architect, as just any person on the street? We also have a popularization of those techniques through YouTube. You can now teach yourself anything. I mean, truly anything. So you no longer have to purely be a specialist. You can learn it yourself. And the final thing with this is there's now a ubiquity of data. And this is quite fascinating. It's not always good data, but there's a lot of data that can be mined and understood so we understand patterns of human behavior, patterns of city behavior, patterns of natural behavior that we could never understand before. And the last two, there has to be, and I believe there will be, a systemic acceptance of the digital transformation. Most bureaucracies don't like change, and Singapore has been quite fascinating because there's been an encouragement of change through the Digital Nation, Digital Singapore initiatives. And so how can we continue to increase the systemic acceptance of these changes and integrate them into our practices as individuals, as professionals? So that for me is quite interesting because we all stand at a moment in time of profound change, personal change, environmental change, political change. And the question for all of us, what we have to ask is, what decisions are we going to be making to push us in one direction or another? And that for me is a very important thing. Like the Sustainable Development Goals, all 17 of these goals have been agreed by every nation in the world. And every one of those, plus the 169 indicators which stand behind them, are things which I believe everyone should look at. Now, I don't expect everyone to remember all of them, but look at them and understand them because all of these are critical. We talk about shaping a better world. This is the better world which we need to be shaping towards. Because if we look at the consumption of stuff, this graph shows the time and the growth of GDP and tracks typically as the world gets richer, as people lift themselves out of the poverty, we consume more stuff. We can't keep doing that. We can't keep doing this. A great-grandfather said, we are too poor to buy cheap stuff. Why would you ever buy anything which you know you're going to throw away 3 months from now, or build? You're going to tear it down 3 years from now. This leads to the circular economy. All of us have an incredibly important role to play in that, and to understand how we can get this by design to be restorative. And Singapore is playing a very focused role in this. I encourage you to make sure you're looking at this and to take a look at this book, Collapse by Jared Diamond, and just take a look at a couple of the graphs. What happens for civilizations to fail, environmental damage, climate change, hostile neighbors, weak trade partners, and a failure to solve societal problems. We stand at that precipice. And so we then also have the role in trying to co-create and co-author the future, which will then have a positive impact and not go down a negative spiral. A piece of homework for you as a recovering academic is from Kate Raworth, Donut Economics. It has the social foundation in the middle, the SDGs, the outer side is the planetary boundaries. Please take a look at this. This is where we have to get to. It's your only piece of homework from me. Darwin said it's not the strongest of species that survives, nor the most intelligent. It's the one that's most adaptable to change. We are an intelligent species. So we then have to be the ones who adapt to the changes around us. And we understand that we know what's happening in this changing world. Knowledge is a commodity. What you do with it is what matters. And this is critical for me. Think about what we do with the knowledge which you have. You have the gift of knowledge, the gift of understanding what's happening to our world around us. Be curious. Make the difference so that you can look at the next generations straight in the eye and say, I did everything I could to make your life better. Reserved for future development. Let's make sure that future development is positive. Thank you ever so much, Singapore, for inviting me to come back to you, and I can't wait to see you again. Thank you.
My name is Micah Koch. I'm the Managing Director for UrbanX, the accelerator for startups reimagining city life, built by Mini and Urban Us. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our perspectives on the changing city landscape. I wish that I could be there in person with you in Singapore, one of my favorite cities and really the model for smart cities globally. This is a really interesting time, and I think cities are reevaluating transportation infrastructure, building infrastructure, public health and wellness. And I think in many ways, COVID-19 has revealed some of the inherent challenges that global cities face in the 21st century. And so in a time where we've sunk a lot of capital into infrastructure, how do we think about that infrastructure and the changes that are to come at a time where cities are really under significant pressure? And I think that our hypothesis is you have to think about cities holistically. You have to think about challenges around transportation and mobility. And traffic, the lost productivity due to traffic. You have to think about the built environment and real estate, the future of work, and the way that remote work will change cities, what it means for cities' tax rolls, what it means for the vibrancy of dense urban environments. And you have to think about infrastructure and industry if in fact you're going to think holistically about climate change and the carbon challenge. And fundamentally, we are really interested in decarbonization and resilience strategies, and we think that the public sector just can't get there on their own, and that what's really needed is new thinking, new approaches to innovation from innovators and from entrepreneurs. And so I would argue that, you know, in a very short amount of time, cities have gone through profound change. And while we may emerge in the second half of 2021 with some degree of normalcy, I do think that there are changes that we will be grappling with for years to come. And arguably the most critical change has to do with emissions and climate adaptation and mitigation. Consider that because of COVID here in the US, emissions dropped roughly 5%. What we really need is sustained emissions drops of roughly 7.5% annually to get us to net zero by 2050. And just to keep our emissions from exceeding the scientific consensus of what's needed to sustain civilization, we have a whole lot of work to do. And so I think the question is, where are the solutions going to come from? What does a better future look like that doesn't have the same degree of carbon intensity, but still has vibrancy and economic growth. And I think that those two things are not mutually exclusive. So what we draw on is a history and a legacy of using crisis as an opportunity to really drive the next stage of growth. And that comes from a gentleman named Sir Alec Agonis, who was an engineer and designer in the late 1950s, who created the first Mini, really as a response to the Suez gas crisis. And I think that it is that heritage and spirit, along with the know-how in terms of execution of design and engineering or global distribution networks, and also the reach of a brand like BMW, that is a real value proposition to startups. And so again, we think that there's a really related opportunity to rethink city life, to use design for new approaches and new solutions, whether those are hardware or software, to take a test, measure, adjust approach, and also to think about the global opportunities beyond just one-offs and prototypes, but really to think about global opportunities to scale. So one of the things that we'll look for in the founders that we work with is, do you have the opportunity to scale to over 100 cities over the next 2 to 5 years? Because we don't think that we have a whole lot of time to figure this out. And so, if you believe that we face this massive challenge, I think the question is, how do we solve for this? And I think that we have to start with the premise that the city is a platform that for too long it has been siloed between infrastructure, the built environment, and people. And we think that there are these new approaches and new technological drivers that are helping to blur some of these lines and create new opportunities for value creation. One of those driving forces is the fact that sensors are cheap, they are everywhere, and the data that they generate can actually be used and acted on in ways that impact urban planning, in ways that impact transportation planning, in ways that ultimately, again, reduce the carbon intensity of our daily activities. And so again, thinking about how do you approach this problem in a way where you can challenge the status quo is something that I think the best entrepreneurs are willing to entertain. And it really is a community of people from all around the world, I think, who are picking up this mantle and tackling some of these society scale issues. And at UrbanX, we're trying to build a global community of the people who are tackling this challenge of climate and better cities, more equitable, more enjoyable, safer cities, because ultimately I think that is where this fight will be won or will be lost. And we talk about cities, we really talk about 7 key sectors where we think, again, there are opportunities for real value creation and for venture scale returns. And within these cities, within these different sectors, we've seen a whole lot of activity on the built environment, primarily because the program had been based in New York, and I think just globally a whole lot of activity around prop tech. But again, I think that there are massive opportunities across the board, and in many ways in between the lines of these different subsets. So I wanted to share a couple of the ideas that we have helped to commercialize and to bring to life, to give you a sense of the kinds of solutions that entrepreneurs are developing and that customers are asking for. So we backed a company called Industrial Organic, which is focused on the issue of food waste. Here in New York City, about 40% of our municipal waste is actually organic and can be composted. And so we think that, again, for cities around the world, you have to start looking at solid waste. In this case, Industrial Organic actually was just sold. They make a cleaning product from organic waste. On micro mobility, which I think has really been is kind of coming into its own during the pandemic. You know, how do you get people ultimately to have a safer experience on their bike or their e-scooter? And part of that is getting them to wear a helmet. We backed a company called Park and Diamond, which developed this really interesting tessellated, foldable, compact helmet for use on bikes and scooters. Another interesting startup is Near Space Labs. They are really pioneering an interesting approach to data, to getting real-time insights without having to launch satellites. So actually using weather balloons, launching them into the stratosphere, and using that for insights into activity in retail, disaster management, and so on. It's not just hardware, it's also software. We have a really interesting team called Sapient Industries that's looking at commercial energy efficiency, which really is the first fuel. So savings for commercial building owners. They built an autonomous energy management system, which is saving commercial landlords a significant amount of money and on all of their plug load. We're also interested in teams who are making urban spaces and public space more fun. This is a startup called Hubster out of Denmark. If you see on the wall over there, they've built a lockable box that contains play equipment. And so trying to activate play through technology and really bring people together around enjoyment of public space. I know urban farming and urban ag is really big in Singapore. We backed a company called Farm Shelf with a really interesting approach to urban ag, servicing hotels and restaurants and consumers all around the world. We're really interested in data on city streets. This is an interesting company called Numina, which is working in about 20 different cities around the world, providing insights as to what's actually happening on city streets. And their tagline is intelligence without surveillance. But a number of different use cases from, you know, how often is garbage actually being picked up to are people actually following social distancing guidelines. We're also really interested in first responders and how you make roads safer. So we backed a company called Pilot, which makes sequential LED flares for traffic accidents and things that are happening on the roadway. And this is a really interesting team, again, with traction and customers all around the world. Early on in the program, we backed a founder out of New Zealand who started a company called AO Air, looking at reinventing the face mask. So this is, again, almost 4 years ago now. And his value proposition was that the face mask hadn't been reinvented really since it was first introduced. And I think that you all in Singapore have a whole lot more experience and I think comfort with masks than most Americans do. But this is a really interesting approach to clean air and to ultimately safeguarding public health. We're interested in the future of the cold chain. How do you maintain a safe environment, not only for food, but now increasingly for vaccines, to make sure that temperature is maintained? So this is a really interesting startup called Therma, using IoT to ensure the integrity of the cold chain. Ava is a drone company really focused on drone infrastructure, also being used for disaster response and being deployed internationally. Metalmark is a really neat materials company that was inspired by butterfly wings. It's a biomimetic catalysis company that is focused on improving indoor air quality. Hades is focused on sewage, a very unsexy topic area, but one, again, that cities have neglected to their own detriment. And so they are using AI to do inspection of sewage pipes so that cities can target the infrastructure that ultimately needs to be fixed and fix it before there's a break. We're really interested in electric mobility here at UrbanX. So we backed a company called Charge Lab, which has built an open software platform for electric vehicle chargers. We think the proliferation of charging infrastructure is really important for more livable cities. Evolve Energy takes a really interesting approach on pricing and getting more renewables into residential homes, and they have a model that ultimately helps to make energy cheaper and get more renewables into the grid. This company was actually just recently acquired. Tro is a startup focused on climate control and air conditioning. Again, another massive issue in Singapore. They have built a system that uses half of the electricity of traditional PTAC window air conditioning units, and also can do heating as well. So it's a novel heat exchange technology. Circuit is an electric transportation company focused on first and last mile, zero emission, ad subsidized. People really, really love this service. I like to say that Circuit is a cash flow positive ride hail company with operations, again, in more than 20 cities here in the US. And you know, with that, I just want to make the call for founders and entrepreneurs and designers and engineers who are tackling some of these big challenges. If you have a solution and are looking for help with customer development and traction, go-to-market, product development, and fundraising here in the US, we would absolutely love to talk to you. I hope you all stay safe. I hope that you continue to be excellent to each other and enjoy the rest of TechInnovation. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here today to talk to you about how we can prepare our cities for pandemics. But imagine this. Imagine if we built our cities in a way that had built-in resilience for business and life continuity. And that's what the idea of the community block is all about. There's a wonderful quote by Arundhati Roy: "Nothing could be worse than a return to normality." Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It's a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. And that is my hope, our hope, that after the year we've had, what it does for design of our buildings, of our neighborhoods, of our cities, will be so much better. We knew our cities had a problem when we started seeing worldwide of really foundational change. This is Times Square before and after the pandemic. Everything stopped. And the fragility of our cities became so evident. We realized, perhaps after a long time, that the health of humans, the health of systems, and our economic health was completely interlinked. And so we started asking ourselves some really fundamental questions. How can we keep cities sustainable, innovative, and accessible while creating resiliency in the face of future pandemics? Is it possible for us to survive the next disease outbreak without going through complete lockdowns? Can we conceive of a city block, a specific area of residents, business owners, even public buildings that share a common purpose, which is built on a foundation of health and wellness and is resilient to pandemics? In other words, can we maintain business and life continuity through a pandemic by design? And we really laser focused on communities because we realized that worldwide, and especially in the US, the approaches were either individual focused or really policy focused. But the missing rung was the community. And communities have the power to enforce guidelines and support individuals, not through laws, but through social bonds and physical connections. And that's what this idea of a prototype community block is, where you really start with the premise that the community is the health system, and you shift dependency from self-sufficiency to really interdependency, from rigidity to flexibility, and most importantly, from disparity to equity. So what you'll see me share with you is a range of strategies that start talking about how we can achieve it. At its crux, the concept of a community block is a community-based ecosystem that supports business and life continuity. It could be as a city block, it could be as a campus, it could be as a building. The evidence supporting it is from urban studies on one end and infection prevention on the other. And again, the same idea that life continuity is business continuity, and a resilient solution works for human, environmental, and fiscal health. There are 6 principles in the community block. 1, it should be self-sustaining to improve both environmental health and social health. 2, you have to have an integrated digital infrastructure where every footprint has a corresponding cloud print. So if you have to move from physical space to digital space and back again, you can do that seamlessly. The idea of circuit and circuit breakers, which really is something Singapore gave to the rest of the world, allows the community to contain certain sections while continuing business and life in others. It's a powerful concept. The idea of flexible and mobile infrastructure. We can no longer afford to have infrastructure that is only fixed. But if you have flexibility and mobility, you can have, when needed, rapid adaptation and decompression. Mixed-use, intergenerational, and inclusive approaches can make so much of a difference so that if one business takes a hit, the other can really fill in. The intergenerational concept as well. We know how our seniors and our aging adults were overwhelmingly impacted. But if the strongest in the community had been able to take care of them, then we wouldn't have to put all the pressure on healthcare systems. And then finally, all of this depends on health, housing, and education as the cornerstones that support business and life continuity. And to achieve these 6 principles, we have proposed 12 design strategies, and I really believe that these strategies will keep evolving. Many of you watching today will build your own strategies, but they range anywhere from locally produced food to mixed-use multicultural community development to urban park networks rather than just having central green spaces, intergenerational zoning. Like imagine if senior living and schools were co-located and adjacent and could really compensate for each other. The idea of thresholds, we have seen how important in-between spaces have been. Finding a way of leveraging that. Connector spaces become wonderful buffer spaces as well. Circuits and circuit breakers, being able to know what areas I can quickly close off. Having net positive buildings so that you really are self-sustaining as a community. The half-mile neighborhood, a lot has been written on that. If you can really reach things you need without having to get on public transport, it makes it so much more resilient. Cloud print support, we are no longer able to separate out physical and digital needs. It has to be an integrated approach, mobile infrastructure, the idea of having mobile carts, mobile clinics, mobile libraries, mobile schools that can be supporting the community normally, but can quickly reconfigure during a pandemic. Ventilation and daylight has become so important in this last year. And then thinking about mobility in multiple scales. So if one scale of mobility becomes at risk, you have other scales that you can rely on. Right? And the idea would be that if you followed these strategies, you would have a beautiful, healthy community, walkable, psychosocially supportive. These mobile pods could be distributed all over as mobile clinics, mobile art galleries, mobile libraries, mobile schools, the idea of urban farms that produce local food, really having visual and physical access to nature constantly so that you can improve mental and physical health. These are all not new principles, but when you bring them together, you create a foundation of health and wellness. And if you think about it in terms of pandemic resilience, you think about just 6 levers that you can pull. And imagine this, that when you are getting into a pandemic, hopefully we would not again, but if we do, or if we are needing it for the second or the third wave, you have 6 levers that you can quickly pull that are activated by the community. These are checkpoints and access, circulation and flow, making sure that access to essential services is maintained. During a normal mode, people go to essential services. During pandemic mode, essential services go to people. And that's where the mobility comes in. Program shift, being able to say, okay, when hospitals need more space, hotels are going to be able to give it. When senior living is compromised, schools can be that leftover space. Understanding all of your community assets and understanding and planning for resource sharing so that no one is overburdened. De-densification and pedestrianization and contact tracing so that you can contain quickly. But imagine if contact tracing is also mobilized by the community, so you are not really fearing for privacy as much because it's based on a trust system. These are all really simple levers, but you pull them and this wonderful block that you had just moves into pandemic mode and still maintains life continuity. So mixed use zoning, for example, allows a hotel to flex from a hotel to a quarantine facility. Homes have thresholds so they can see the community, they can visually connect, even though they're physically distant. There's limited car transportation, but you have pedestrianized streets to distribute essential goods. You can start immediately protecting your compromised, immunocompromised populations and immediately create almost a wall of defense around them without compromising their social health. One of the toughest decisions we've had to make in these times is that to keep someone physically safe, we have had to compromise their psychological safety. But if you build on a foundation of health and wellness, and you think about what levers you can pull, you can maintain their social health as well. So all of these strategies and everything that I'm sharing with you is open source. You can avail of the full document anytime that you need. But this idea of thinking of a very flexible system that thinks through different scenarios, but because it's built on health and wellness, it can flex so easily. For example, what was an urban farm and a grocery store can just become a food delivery hub. And all these little mobile units that were distributed across your community now become centralized areas for testing, for tracing, for triage, maybe even mobile schools. When children can't go to the schools come to the neighborhoods. That's the level of flexibility and mobility that we need. The idea that I can go from normal mode to pandemic mode because I've built on health and wellness. And the other key component to making this work is you have to work as a system across the design continuum, all the way from apps. So apps that are for healthy eating, healthy lifestyles could be the same app a community uses for contact tracing. Natural light and indoor-outdoor schemes, those work in normal times as well. But during a pandemic, they become our lifeline. Ventilation and daylighting that you're providing with threshold zones also serve as buffer zones. So what you're seeing in the top row is what I would do for health and wellness. And what you're seeing in the bottom row is the ability to really give pandemic resilience with the same attributes. And this idea is not completely new. Right in your backyard, the Toa Payoh neighborhood is exactly like that. It's a high-density town that has supported business and life continuity, right? Because you had a mixed-use plan and design overall, because you had pedestrianized streets and rooftops and food stalls and rec centers and urban parks and open spaces, that neighborhood could still continue. This range of affordances that were allowed in that block in the city allowed residents not to travel out of the community when it was dangerous and not to rely on public transport as much. The other piece that is fascinating about this neighborhood is about the really mixed ethnicity that it supported, the whole multicultural concept. And that's really, really important as well, because it gives you a COVID advantage when your needs are met within the community. ventilation, solar panels, void decks, all of these have helped you in having pandemic resilience. Vertical farming, continuous ground floor parks, walkable neighborhoods, third places, ability to support different mobility devices. These are all ideas that thrive. Even a new neighborhood we're designing in San Diego right now has the same concepts, very mixed use, ability to translate, access to nature and daylight, access to air, ability to spatially be distant even when you're socially connected. So important right now. And all of these good design principles with digital infrastructure integrated make a difference because they allow us to shift between the physical and digital as needed. In the end, what we hope this entire year has taught us is 3 or 4 fundamental shifts. One, we have realized that I'm not just responsible for my health. I am responsible for your health, and you are responsible for mine. So we have to survive really as a community. We have to thrive as a community. The shift from aesthetics to synthetics, we know how we experience things matters. The shift from physical to digital and from physical to phygital, where you realize that our digital and physical realities are integrated. And most importantly, perhaps, even as we go through all of these shifts and understand that our worlds are so intrinsically interwoven that we are finally realizing in 2020 that a purely human-centered world will not get us where we need to be. We have to shift from being human-centered to living-centered and think like an ecosystem, really celebrating differences, celebrating interdependencies, and understanding that being a community gives us health, makes us resilient. Thank you so much for your time.